welcome to the 22nd in this series of Fireside Chats, and we are so thrilled to have Mark and Vera here, but particularly to be interviewing Mark, who played a very significant part in the history of our Jewish community from when it was quite small to I guess, was 9 years he was here. He came for 2, and they stayed for 9, which is a very typical Hong Kong story. But the community changed so dramatically in that time, and that is his story, so I don't want to tell you any more about it. But I would like to say that the Jewish Historical Society now has an excellent website. It's jhshk.org, and thanks to Howard and to Mark, it is now online and terrific. We would love to add things to it, histories or any information that you feel we should know about your ancestors or your own history. We'd love to add to it, so please access it and have a look. It's really good. I won't give you anything more about Jewish Historical Society, nor will I give away any of Mark's secrets. So I'll hand you over to Sharon.
Thank you.
Who will interview Mark.
And ladies and gentlemen, there's only so much we're going to be able to get through tonight, and the great thing is that Mark is working on a good written book that we'll certainly be letting you know about once it's available. And Mark, welcome back to Hong Kong.
Thank you.
It would be fair to say that much of your life has been very much influenced by the doctrine of the shared. You're absolutely convinced that some things are meant to be, and indeed that's how things have fallen into place for you. And in a way, that's how your coming to Hong Kong happened this time.
Yes.
Tell us about the Diaspora Museum in Israel.
The Diaspora Museum I approached a few months ago when I was researching about the history of Jewish Hong Kong, and it appeared to me that they were only writing about communities that were disappearing, dying communities. And then I wrote a letter in the blind to the management of Beta Futsot, and I said, listen, there's a terrific story about Hong Kong and the Far East, and would it be appropriate that you pay some attention, to what's happening there? And within half an hour, I got a letter back, an email back from the management, and they said, definitely, we have to start working on it. And I went there when Anja Appelbaum went to Israel, and Daphne Peiser, and we paid a visit, and we started the dialogue, and the program is on.
And I'm delighted to tell you that the film that Howard is producing for us tonight will certainly be presented to the Diaspora Museum once we've got it cut and ready. So this is really, really very important part of your plan. Now, you were born in Amsterdam. You're one of 2 children who were born in the Netherlands. Were your parents born there also?
No, my parents are from Polish origin. Actually, my father came from Lodz and my mother from Brzezin, but they met each other and they got married during the war, 1943.
In the Polish ghetto?
In the ghetto of Lodz.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where they got married, and they promised eternal love. They were separated. At the end, the ghetto of Lodz was closed, and the people were sent to the camps. My mother ended up in Bergen-Belsen, was sent to Sweden for recovery by Volker Bernadotte. My father was looking for my mother 6 months after the war. My uncle had a factory in the Netherlands importing from Poland, from the family. So he said, come to the Netherlands to my mother when he heard that she was alive. So that's how my mother ended up in the Netherlands. And then when my mother and father got reconnected, my father came to Holland. And so I was born in 1947.
Remarkable, first of all, that your parents, having married in 43 in a ghetto, having been separated because of the war, both going to different concentration camps, and then, thank God, surviving and finding each other, certainly reinforces your belief in the shares and how things turn out. How was it growing up in the Netherlands, the children of survivors? Was it very difficult for you in the Netherlands? Were your parents burdened by the memories that they had from concentration camp life?
They must have been burdened because my mother was one of 8 and only 4 survived. But it was not an issue in our family. I'm second generation, but I wasn't burdened by the heavy load of the World War. And my parents came to the Netherlands, which for them was paradise. So according to them, I grew up, in paradise. And they didn't have, negative connotations. For my Dutch friends, they lost family, and they were walking in the streets and they would tell me, listen, my uncle had a cigar shop here. I didn't have any of those references, so I grew up in paradise.
Yes. And given that part of our story here is going to be your contribution to shaping Jewish life here in Hong Kong, what was Jewish life like for you in the Netherlands?
We were a traditional family. We had a kosher home. I went to synagogue from time to time with my late father. And my father sent me to Sunday school instead of playing football. Soccer on Sunday, I had to go to Sunday school. I had the best teacher that I ever had in any education. And things from what I learned when I was 10, I still remember today. If I go to Pal in Israel, it really pops up, from nowhere, but I know where I learned it and how I learned it. So his way of thinking definitely shaped what we are doing today.
Yeah, and you met and married the lovely Vera in the Netherlands. Had you known each other long? Were you part of the close-knit Jewish community there?
I do quite long. She was the best friend of my sister. So she came. She was not on the Jewish school, but she came to our home, and they were giggling. We were not in the age of dating, and so I knew her, and we spoke to each other, but it was not a love affair. But there was one of these evenings. It was a Jewish evening. I think it was a Hanukkah party somewhere in the southern part of the Netherlands. And my girlfriend had dumped me a month before, so she was there. And my sister and her friend at that time wanted to go to the party, and I said, "Okay, let's go together." So we went together. And we had a nice evening, and then we went back by car from Eindhoven to Amsterdam, and we were sitting under a raincoat, and we gave each other a kiss, and that's how it started. And we still taste the kiss today.
Very nice. You were married in 1971.
Yeah.
Your first child, a son, was born in 1975. And Vera was pregnant with your second daughter during the summer of 1977. You were busy reconstructing your life, planning to buy a house, and then you had a phone call that changed everything. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it started, I joined the bank in 1971, the same year we got married. So I had a few years of work, and my work essentially dealt with Israeli companies. It was the time of the Israeli boycott, and I became very much involved in helping Israeli companies avoid the boycott, and companies like Teva making the first acquisitions overseas. I was the banker that did the very first acquisition of Teva overseas. Had a very nice job, but I told my boss, what's my future like? And so I said, let me think about it. And then a month later, he came to me and said, you'll get a telephone call in 10 minutes, and if you say no, you make the mistake of your life. Okay. So the chairman of the bank called me, can you have a tea with me? And I come to him, and we have a tea. Mark, let me know. We did, I'll tell you. We checked it out, the place has a synagogue and they have kosher food. That's how we started the conversation.
Which place?
No, I didn't tell which place. And then I'm sitting there with the tea and I'm looking around, and I didn't know what he was talking about. The bank was very local, we didn't have any overseas branches. They said, okay, I'll disclose it, confidentially. We're planning to open up a branch in Holland, and in Hong Kong, and we want you to open the branch. So I'm sitting there, Vera was pregnant. We had a notary visit planned that afternoon because we bought a house. And so he comes with this idea, Hong Kong. I didn't know even where it was on the map, etc. Anyway, this is how it started. You know, this was the opening to Hong Kong, and he said, you know, buy a ticket, go on a fact-finding mission. And I'll just finish that point here. So I went out of the office of the chairman, and I go to the notary with Vera, and we buy the new house. And then we get out of the notary's office, and then she, oh, you know, it's great, you know, we have a new house, we have to redecorate it, etc. Oh, yeah, we're going to decorate a new house. And then, so I told her, yeah, but it won't be Amsterdam. So she said, what? So what do you mean? So I said, no, tell her the story about Hong Kong. Hong Kong, you know, that you must be joking. So this is how it started, you know.
So you planned a fact-finding trip. You went alone, or you went with Vera at that stage?
No, this is, Vera was not allowed to travel. She was 8 months pregnant. And then so I asked the bank, you know, what I'm supposed to do there. I said, listen, this is a business plan. No, the reason why we chose you is you have to write a business plan, and you have to tell us what to do. And then I asked him, so who are going to approach in Hong Kong? So he said, listen, the details about the kosher food and the synagogue, you know, we checked out. We had a client, Philip Brothers, in Amsterdam. And Philip Brothers has an office in Hong Kong, and the managing director of that is Richard Ellman. So I buy a ticket, and that was my contact. There was another Dutch contact, Bob Kronenberg, who you all know, who lived here, and who had sent a telex about baby food and other stuff. But anyway, so I take a plane, and I had 4 days, you know, to make up my mind. And I arrive at the old Kai Tak airport, and there's a few thousand people. You all know the old situation. You know, there's a few thousand people waiting in line before immigration. So I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, you know, I have a few days. I better start, you know, interviewing people here to know what's going on. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. So I'm standing next to a guy. I start talking, to the guy, and you know, so you know, we exchange trivia, and then the story sort of develops, and I say I'm from Amsterdam and I'm a banker. And then this person says, oh, that's interesting, a banker from Amsterdam. I'm supposed to meet a banker from Amsterdam. And then, you know, he had given me some information, so I said, okay, if that is the case, you must be Richard Ellman. And he was Richard Ellman. And, you know, so out of the few thousand people, I come here, you know, on a mission to Hong Kong, and the only contact, you know, that was given to me is Richard Ellman. And you know, that really changed and formed the entry to the Jewish community. And as a result of that, the Jewish community has been essential for us.
Next day you had meetings and met other very well-known names in the community. You met up with Victor Zirinsky.
Yes, through the introduction of Richard Ellman. And Victor Zirinsky introduced me to David Citrin, and David Citrin introduced me to Katja, and they took me to the Jewish club, and they showed me their children. Richard Ellman took me to his flat in Reedmans Bay. So this was in the first 2 days.
And you reconnected with Bob Kronenberg and his wife Nancy.
Of course, yeah.
And you were, in the 3 or 4 days that you were here, you started to get a feel for the place. You'd effectively arrived on Wednesday. On Friday, you were calling your wife to wish her Shabbat Shalom. Did you have any other news for her?
Yeah. What happened was, so Vera asked me, so how's your fact-finding going on? I said, actually, I finished my fact-finding. So, I mean, how can you finish your fact-finding in 3 days? I said, it's very easy. I met Richard Ellman, and he showed me his apartment, and you know, there's a beautiful view on Reedmans Bay. And he told me that he would arrange a flat for us, and I'm 100% sure you will be very happy. Okay, said what else? And I said, I met David Citrin and his family, and I think Katja will become your best friend. Okay, you know, I understand all of that, but what about banking? You know, you have to set up a new branch. So I said, oh, that was the easiest part. Okay, how? So I went to the Commissioner of Deposit-Taking Companies. I asked a list for banks operating in Hong Kong. And they gave me a list of 230 banks. So then I thought, if there's business for 230, there's business for 231, so I don't have to make a market study. So basically, so I said I finished it, and then I went on the boat with Richard Ellman, and what happened was that we lived in the flat on the same building as Richard Ellman. Katja until today is a very good, even best friend of Vera, and we opened the branch. So I had a 100% score of that fact finding.
So all of these things are falling into place. It's all meant to be. Your daughter was born in November of '77,
Yeah.
and you arrived in Hong Kong at springtime 1978.
Yeah. We wanted to see first if she was healthy and to sort things out. So the bank allowed us to wait until the situation with the children were clear and they could travel such a long distance. It was 22 hours in those days.
And like so many people who come to Hong Kong, you thought you'd be coming here for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the plan and the project, and then you'd be returning back. And why was it so important for you to have a fixed period of time in mind?
No, we worked on a contract basis in those days. You were an expat, you had a package. I didn't know what was going on in Hong Kong. I didn't want to commit myself. The bank didn't want to commit itself because they didn't know, whether I would be able to perform here or not. So, it was a normal period of contract in those days.
And your parents were completely supportive of the move?
They were totally supportive of the move, although very disappointed from the fact that they didn't have any grandparents. When our children were born, they said, "Now we will play grandparents that you didn't have." So over the whole period, that was a determining factor at what time we should go back.
Yes, I can imagine. You arrive in Hong Kong, you immediately plunge yourself into Jewish life and Jewish cultural life. You started visiting Ole Synagogue, and that was followed by what became the very sort of famous Sunday buffet at the Jewish Recreation Club. So that became part of your life very, very quickly.
It was easy because through the Jewish Recreation Club, as it was called at that time, we had a network of friends and people that we could relate to. And it was quite amazing because we were also a member of the Dutch community. And some of our Dutch friends, were astonished to see that we had a flat, and that we up and running, and we were settled, in no time. We had friends, we had parties, we had all the holidays. It was like a natural, like you're meeting family. So for us, the Jewish Recreation Club, it started with giving us a lot, and it ended up by a mutual cooperation.
Yeah. We weren't lucky enough to have the Kosher mark there in 1978, so how were families who were anxious to remain observant and kosher, how were they catering for themselves?
There was Mrs. Diestel who had a small stock of kosher meat, but slowly we found out that there were other families, and we felt maybe we could organize it in a communal way and make a bigger variety. So we started to import meat from the United States by container and put it in cold storage. And every meat bill was $2,000. So Vera went to the cold storage for Friday to get the chicken, from the freezing. So that's how we did it.
Now, Vera becomes a key person in this story because although as a family you're plunging yourselves into family life, you're busy setting up a bank. And Vera in 1980 becomes the chair of the Jewish Women's Association. So she becomes heart and soul of Hong Kong Jewish community, with the bazaars, with everything else that's become so familiar here in Hong Kong. And if that wasn't enough, a year later, in 1981, Vera revives the Hong Kong Jewish Chronicle. Now, the Jewish Chronicle had been started in 1977 by Hannah, who is here, by Judy Diestel, who I don't think is here, and also by Stephanie Leiter. And it had gone through a period of lull, but Vera was anxious to get the Jewish Chronicle going. and she and Bob Cronenberg became joint editors of the Jewish Chronicle. And it's right that Bob created the logo that we still use here at the JCC, the Mogen David with the junk in the middle. Now, how important was the Jewish Chronicle in terms of developing Jewish knowledge on a religious basis as well as cultural, once that got started again in 1981?
There was no communication in those days. The fax wasn't invented. Email didn't exist. The only way to communicate with the members was through a medium like this. And that medium, we all use now Word or some other program to write documents, but there's a function in it, and that is called cut and paste. And cut and paste comes from that area where they really were cutting typed sheets into shape and gluing it on a piece of paper that then would be photographed and then be reprocessed in the system. But they spent day and night to publish one issue. So that was the only way to communicate. So we had to start somewhere. So Vera can tell better.
And the Jewish Chronicle would often feature interviews or bits of information about not just Hong Kong Jewish residents, but it was a period of time in Hong Kong, maybe it's the same now, where you had many visiting Jewish people coming to Hong Kong for business and seeking out the Jewish community, and particularly the synagogue. How involved did you become with those visitors who were coming to Hong Kong in terms of finding out their stories and what needs needed to be catered?
These the people came to the synagogue on Shabbat, a lot of these people, and every Shabbat there were minimum 8 to 10 visitors from places from all over the world, and we would have a kiddush after that. And knowing a little bit about the history of the Silk Road, they had synagogues on every 7 days of travel. So you have Cochin and you had Kaifeng, and I'm sitting there, as a young guy, and I'm listening to all these travelers. It was very important to them, to have a place to go to a synagogue and to eat kosher. There were people, amazing stories. There was one guy with a black hat, in Peyot. So I asked him, what is the reason why you're coming here? What is your expertise? So he tells me he's a shrimp expert and he is selling his expertise to the Chinese. There were people, it was incredible stories. One story was more incredible than the other. And so it was very interesting to meet those people and also to listen to their needs. So basically you felt that those people were looking for a center to travel that they could rely on for their Jewish needs.
And in 1982, so you'd already extended your period of time here. In 1982, you were promoted as general manager of the bank. So clearly your time here was going to be a good deal longer. Your children were getting a bit older, and at that time, Ezra Sassoon was the chairman of the Jewish Recreation Club Committee, as it was then. His goals were to attract more local involvement with the club, to double the membership, but also to cater to the needs of Jewish visitors. Your son was now 7, attending Sunday school, your daughter 5, also attending Sunday school. How connected were you with the goals of Ezra Sassoon at that stage in terms of his ideals for the Jewish community, Jewish Recreation Club in Hong Kong, and how things were to develop in Hong Kong?
No, in those days I was the secretary, and we worked very closely together as a real good team. we tried many things, to bring the finances of the community in order, and we tried to raise income, from many different resources, and we had lots of ideas, and the attendance in the Sunday school was increasing, and we improved the Sunday brunches, many activities, but but in as far as the attendance was concerned of activities outside of these Sunday school, etc., the attendance was very low. And in preparing this fireside chat, I checked the minutes, and the reasons are very well minuted over there. It's very clearly written that according to Ezra, there's a lack of identity. The Jewish club doesn't have an identity. And as a result of that, people rather go to the ladies' recreation club or some other club, you know, where there's a swimming pool, rather than sit at the lawn, you know, on broken chairs in a building that needs fresh coat of paint. So so you had on the one hand side, you had an identity crisis in the club, where people didn't know where to go. On the other hand, you know, you had a demand from the Jewish element. So things were, you know, cooking up a little bit. So you know, I could feel it happening, but you know, you are not in a position to do anything, nor was it clear enough what direction it should take.
In 1984, you were able to shape the direction a little bit more when you became elected chair of the Jewish Recreation Club Committee. And I've got here a list of familiar names from that 1984 committee. We've got Rob Dorfman here, who was then on fundraising. And we had Hannah, who was working on social program and youth activities. William McCatter talking about redevelopment and house maintenance. Gus Diestel on security in the cemetery at that time. Yes. Michael covering the Jewish Benevolent Society. So you had people who are still here and still very active in the community. Jack Crystal was in charge of the religious committee, and he and his committee started to institute a regular Friday night Shabbat dinner. And how did that structure start going? Was that a committed decision on the part of the committee to strengthen Jewish identity and to create the structure that Ezra had felt was missing within the JRC?
Yeah, it started from actually from the Sunday school, from the visitors that sent their children to the Sunday school, and the really catalyst that really brought us together was the fact that we send our children to the Sunday school and we learn about kashrut and we learn about Shabbat and all the stuff, and then we come up to the Sunday buffet. And then we see, you know, pork and shellfish and all the things that we couldn't eat. And there was, you know, there was not very logic. So there were a few families, and I think Jacob is here and Anna is here, and we all sat together, and then we said, you know, it's not logic. You know, we have to change the direction. So I said, okay, fine. You know, I'm willing to put time in it, but we can only, you know, get things changing here, you know, if we work together and if we define clear goals and working committees and do our homework and then go to the trustees and tell our stories that we need to make changes. So it was a natural development that was being pushed by the members that felt it had to go to a different level.
The impetus from the members trying to create a sort of common higher denominator that would be attractive and comfortable for all members of the Jewish community.
Yeah, we had with these families that we were celebrating the holidays together. We had Pesach together. We were like family, you know. And even today, you know, there's 8 families in Israel that we still meet today.
All from Hong Kong.
All from Hong Kong. That we were together. They had children the same age, and we became family until today. It's the Abrams, the Harrells, you know, Yoram Harel, the singer. It's Bibi Lasky. It's who else? Huh? Nomi Peli, we saw that recently. So it was a nucleus, you know. It was a small nucleus, but the nucleus was big enough to create the momentum, and the momentum not for a short period of time. It became, you know, for a very long period.
The chairman of the trustees at that time was Lord Kaduri. being now the chairman of the Jewish Recreation Club Committee, did that give you access to Lord Kaduri to talk about the views of the JRC committee and how the trustees could be working with them in order to advance matters?
Yes, I look back at the time that I could spend with Lord Kaduri as a very privileged time. And his door was open. He said, "You can call my secretary," which I did on many occasions, and I would have a meeting the same day. Would always make time available, and I would see his nice jade collection and certainly beautiful tea. And we had many philosophical discussions of, of what is the Jewish community.
At that time, there was a Reverend Hirschberg who was leading services in Hong Kong. He had come to a point in time when he was planning to leave Hong Kong in order to return to Israel. Were you able to talk as representative of the JRC committee to Lord Kaduri as representing the trustees in terms of what kind of replacement you wanted for Reverend Hirschberg and how you wanted religious leadership within the community to develop?
Yeah, I would say these are, if I look back at my active life, whether as a banker or whatever, one of the most interesting talks, many talks I had in my life with anybody, because you are a young guy, an outsider, you are transient here, you have to speak to families that were born here, that are business icons, that have a track record, and you know already in advance that you have a different opinion. So that's how the conversation starts, and so it was not easy. But Lord Kaduri has always listened to listen to other opinions. And when I became the chairman of the Jewish community, he learned me something that was quite interesting, and he learned me the word manipulated democracy.
Manipulated democracy.
Probably the trustees know what I mean, but he taught me about manipulated democracy. So I asked Lord Kaduri, "I've never heard of manipulated democracy. Can you explain it to me?" He said, "Mark, listen. When you are in a meeting, you listen to everybody, you listen to their opinions, but when it comes to decision making, there's only one who decides. And that's the manipulated democracy." So probably you know better than I. So that was really one of the first meetings he taught that to me. So I was warned. So I knew when I'm in a meeting and he's very nice to me, it would be very difficult, to change his mind if he had a certain mindset. And that was my challenge all the time.
And was there a common vision as to what kind of rabbi would be the right spiritual leader for Hong Kong at that time? Was the committee in complete agreement with the trustees in terms of the sort of the discipline, the religious discipline that the rabbi would come from? Was there any kind of discussion about that, or
yes, we had not only a discussion, but we had an exchange of correspondence on the subject, of which I still have the letters today. I think they are very valuable documents, because they document a period in the history of Hong Kong that is extremely interesting. And Lord Kaduri had at the outset as his vision, he wanted to have a community, one community. He said, the moment you get more religious, the community will split up, and I don't want the community to split up. So he said, you have to be very careful, if you start playing, with religion in that. And so, I tried, on different occasions when he went back, we talked about rabbi, and then I got a checklist from Lord Kaduri with questions to ask the rabbi. So I have a 2-page document that for potential future rabbi, I should ask certain questions. Now, I won't repeat these questions here, maybe I publish it one day or not, but those were definitely questions that you cannot ask a religious rabbi. So I never asked those questions. So I never asked those questions. So, Lord Kaduri himself taught me, how to handle such situations. So, I went along, but then I had a religious committee with Hannah, they were pushing me in a different direction, so I was listening there. So it was shaping, I felt like a real politician in those days, because I had the trustees on this side and I had the religious people on the other side, and there was definitely tension between the two ideas.
There's a great minute that I am going to read out just to sort of highlight perhaps the difficulties you had as man in the middle trying to suit everybody. Michael Skolnick recorded in the minutes of the JRC meeting that having had these discussions with Lord Kaduri and having had discussions amongst the committee, that, and I now quote, "Since the Jewish community of Hong Kong was in fact made up of Jews with various degrees of observance, the rabbi should be accepted by each faction of the community, and the services held must be acceptable to each faction, be they Reform, Conservative or Orthodox, and also whether they're Sephardic or Ashkenazi." Now, as we say in the law, that's quite a brief. So you had a very specific list of requirements that had emerged from those meetings.
That's correct.
So you had the extremely exciting and enviable task of leading now the rabbi search, and you started that committee. There were some discussions about how the rabbi for the community was to be funded. There were various discussions as to what proportion would be funded by the trust, what should be self-funding from the communities. So that also led to certain issues, and it's right that at about that time your committee was then approached by the Lubavitch movement, who offered to sponsor one or two young rabbis for a specific period of time in order to move the Hong Kong Jewish community forward. Was that right?
Yes, but just to complete the picture, this was after we interviewed maybe 10 other rabbis,
Okay.
of which one came to Hong Kong, Rabbi David Seed, if I remember correctly, and they went. So we felt that none of these candidates would complete the description as you have just described.
Yes.
So, and you will ask yourself, how do we end up with Chabad, if that is the description, but we'll come to that, in a minute. But we were approached by, I think the Rabbi Search Committee got in touch with Lubavitch in New York, and they were willing to send, as it was labeled at that time, 2 students. They were not, there were 2 students. Basically, I think the students were completing their rabbinical studies in the yeshiva, and I didn't know the names at that time, but the issue was 2 Lubavitch students want to come to Hong Kong and help us out with Pesach.
And still you're sort of pretty torn in terms of which kind of rabbi can serve the community, which led to some, we have our very own rabbi making a very dramatic entrance.
At the right moment.
Just in case we should forget him, he makes sure he comes in at the right moment. But that led to you in January 1985 having a really sort of pivotal conversation with Lord Kaduri about where you were standing in the rabbi search.
Yes.
And what was to be done.
21st of January.
And what happened on the 21st of January?
Now, we were preparing for Pesach, and we had this offer of the Lubavitch rabbis to come in and help us out. And I wanted to have the blessing of the trustees, and especially Lord Kaduri. I had a good relationship with him, and okay, we agreed to disagree on certain points, but it was, it were very, very, very good level discussions. So I explained to him about the possibility, and Lord Kaduri says basically that he doesn't want to go in that direction. And so I was sitting there, and I was really stuck. And then I asked myself, how do I get myself, out of this situation? I don't want to leave empty-handed. And then I don't know what happened, but I thought I got a brainwave. And then I said to Lord Kaduri, I respect what you say, but I've been going to the Jewish community for many years now. And I think if I respect what you say, I think there's only one solution. When I come to the Jewish club, there's a sign on it and it says the Jewish Recreation Club. So if we follow your line of thinking, then we should take away the word Jewish, because there's nothing Jewish about the club. And visitors that are coming, expect a kosher kitchen and a mikvah, and I meet these people every week, and it's a misrepresentation of what the community is. But if you want to leave the word Jewish, we have to add elements to make it Jewish, and it's not so difficult. So what do you want? I said, I want to have the two Lubavitch students come here, and the community has to become kosher. And he agreed on the spot. And there's a date for it, there's the 21st of January, I had a meeting with Lord Kaduri, and he agreed, to the approach. And then, we could continue the discussions. So then, I had sort of the green light from the top, and then we had to work in the community. But that's probably your next question.
Well, I'm interested now, you have the green light for the student rabbis to come along. That student rabbi is Rabbi Mordecai Afson, still here obviously in Hong Kong. How did things get started? He was brought here to prepare for Pesach, to organize a communal Seder. What was going on?
I think, if I remember correctly, he came in, with another Rabbi Gurkov, because according to the Lubavitch system, you cannot travel alone. He was not married at that time, so he had to be accompanied by somebody else. So on his first trip, he came, with another student, Rabbi Michael Gurkov.
And how did you prepare for a kosher Pesach that year?
No, that was a little bit later, but in the beginning, Rabbi Afton knows better exactly the date when he arrived. But at some point, we had to prepare for Pesach, and we asked Rabbi Afton to give the first kosher Seder for the community, which I asked him to do, and then he said, okay, I'm willing to do that, but the kitchen has to be kosher. So I said, okay, it's my promise, I'll take care of that, and the kitchen will be kosher.
And how was that facilitated? Did you get members from the community to do that, or?
As we talked before, the kitchen was not kosher, so it had to be cleaned by a professional cleaning company with power steam engines, etc. And so this was the day before Pesach. So we hired through the club this cleaning company. They came with a big truck. I came from the office in the morning to check out whether they arrived. And indeed they were there, 4 or 5 people, and took out the equipment, and they started to clean the kitchen, and went back to the office, and at 12 o'clock I inspected the kitchen again. And it started to look like a brand new kitchen, with white walls, and they took out all the lard from the walls, etc. And then Rabbi Afton was planned to arrive later in the evening, so I come at around 6 o'clock. And I see that these guys are almost finished, and a few minutes later they finished, and they put all the equipment back in the car. They wanted to have money. So I said, no paying, Rabbi, come, check, paying, pidgin English, and they didn't understand the clue. So they were waiting there, and meanwhile, Rabbi Afton came, and I asked, Rabbi, can you please inspect the kitchen? So, these guys worked the whole day with sophisticated, high-tech cleaning powder, I don't know. Rabbi comes in and goes with his finger on the wall, and he says, look at this. He said, this is absolutely not kosher. You cannot go ahead, with that. They have to take out all the equipment, and they have to start cleaning again. So I tried to go, I think it was a Chan or one of these stewards, and I said, no good, Rabbi, approve, not approve, no pay. Anyway, so these guys didn't move at all. They didn't want to take out the equipment. They get very irritated. They call the police. Okay, so the police comes. You know, I'm standing on the old lawn. You know, the police comes there, and there's Chinese crew, there's our stewards from the club, rabbi is there, I am there. We couldn't talk because there was really a language barrier. So, so one of the policemen says, okay, my friends speak English. Goes back calls, you know, there were no mobile phones. 1 hour later, 2 hours later, I don't know, a guy comes in and comes.
Chinese guy?
A Chinese guy comes in, yeah. A Chinese guy comes in and so I walked towards him and I started talking to him. Short sleeve, open collar, so I see the McCain David from the Chinese guy. So I asked the Chinese guy, why are you wearing a McCain David? So he said, I worked 1 year in Israel. Oh, that's very interesting. And where did you work? Oh, he says, I worked in the kibbutz. Okay, that's interesting. And what did you do in the kibbutz? So he said, I worked in the kitchen. So I said, okay, so you know what is Pesach? So the Chinese guy tells me, yes, the kitchen has to be kosher. I said, okay, that's my problem. So that's my problem. So please tell the guys, explain to them, you know, what is kosher at Pesach. And in a minute, they took out all the equipment. They started to clean the kitchen following the instructions of Rabbi Afzal. And at 11 o'clock in the evening, the kitchen was declared kosher. Now, you know, in this whole story, like Richard Ellman, you know, and you know, in my memoirs you will find more of those situations where there are critical moments, and then, you know, out of nothing, you know, comes a solution. And I spoke with Ellen. He said it's like a Deus ex machina. You know, it's you know, like Eliyahu Navi. You know, somebody comes there and finds a solution, and then we have a kosher Pesach. So these are, you know, these were all road signs for me, all simanim, you know, min hashamayim, that we were on the right track. So, you know, I was very much encouraged. For the sake of the video, I have to add that after 11 o'clock, Rabbi Afton went back to his rabbinical flat, and there were 2 ovens. One was killed by the cleaning operation, and in the other oven, he roasted the chickens for 150 people for the Seder that evening, and he worked all night. But the chickens were there were 150 people at the Seder, and the minutes show there was a profit of 18,000 Hong Kong dollar.
Not bad.
So again, you know, all kinds of signs. People were looking for, you know, for an identity.
An important communal Seder. It happened from April 1985 onwards. There is a real significant and recognizable spiritual direction here in Hong Kong when the JRC resolves to offer Rabbi Afson a permanent contract for a fixed period of time to commit to koshering the kitchen at the JRC. So unfortunately, all those Singapore noodles do an exit stage left. And you also agreed to reinstall the mikveh. So very, very significant changes within the Jewish community. Now, as far as the Jewish Historical Society is concerned, 1985 also becomes an important year for us because you spearhead that committee as well. And you are behind the creation of the Jewish Historical Society with Denis Leventhal, who at that stage wanted to publish, and then a little bit later our very own S.J. Chan. Denis Leventhal wanted to publish a history of the Jews in Asia or just Hong Kong?
It was no. He wrote the history of the Jews of Hong Kong, and the essential part of the book was the Kaduri Memoir. It was a letter that Lord Kaduri had written to his secretary, or maybe it was not his secretary, but a certain Mrs. Luba, in which he writes his memoirs, and this was a personal letter that Denis got hold of, and he asked Lord Kaduri to publish it. And that became the very first publication. No, that's not this one. That's not a book. I think the book is at the entrance. The book is at the entrance. That was the very first book. that kicked off the Historical Society, and then S.J. wrote a monograph that he subsequently presented in the Beta to Futsal.
That's it.
The Jews of Kaifeng.
SJ was certainly the inspiration behind the Jews of Kaifeng, and Denis Leventhal's book, Whence to Whither.
Whence and Whither.
When and Whither was very much the early challenge as far as making sure that the Jewish Historical Society was able to document the past and the present. And the ideal very much behind the Jewish Historical Society was to understand one's past is to understand the future. What was the basic philosophy behind it?
The basic philosophy behind it was there is a terrific history. You know, Hong Kong was an important place in the past, and with all the changes going on in the 80s, you know, the financial center and the initial talks with China, maybe at some point in 86, 87, about 1997, it was only logic, you know, to bring together, you know, the history, because most of the history that was published until that time, and maybe even until today, is the history like, you know, Judy has over there, you know, it's the history of Sassoon, and the granting of the trust and the establishing and the history of the cemetery, and some recent developments in the community, but there was nothing published even today. That's why the Beta to Futsal has a database that's you know, that's not populated with all the achievements that you all are part of.
Now, you were approaching the time when you would be leaving here in 1986, and we'll go a little bit behind those reasons shortly, but it meant that you were here for the early challenges of the redevelopment of the centre here. And the trustees and the Jewish Recreation Community Centre were in communication with each other about how best to approach the matter.
I wouldn't phrase it that way. It was one-way traffic mainly, and we had William Mokata on the committee who reported from time to time what was the status of the redevelopment, but we were not part of the decision-making process. There was the trustees' work, and I never intended to be part of that anyway. So we were given information in maybe 82, 83 that discussion started, you know, with the redevelopment, and he had the good news that the Sunday school could stay at least 1 other year on the premises. This was 1983, so you know how long it lasted. But you know, we were never part of the decision-making process.
The JRC committee did do some work, though, to ensure that the synagogue itself would remain in situ, that it wouldn't be reconstructed or taken down.
No, this is something that happened by forces outside the trustee and or the committee, because this was instigated by a press release in the South China Morning Post, where it was mentioned that a redevelopment was imminent. It was a contract that was signed with Swire. This was after the Holland deal collapsed. And in the article, it was mentioned that the synagogue could not be maintained and probably had to be destroyed. And when this article appeared, some very concerned members stormed into my office and said, listen, this cannot happen. So you know, there was a committee, the religious committee actually, and the religious committee started to do its own investigation, and they took the rabbinic opinion in various places in the world. And one of the opinions, or two opinions that they received were from the chief rabbi of Israel, both from the Sephardim as well as from the Ashkenazim, stating very clearly that you know, it's a very thick document. I have it, the original advice from them, And it stated that according to the Talmud, the Gemara, you cannot destroy a city synagogue. And this was in their view a city synagogue. So this was the situation as per 86.
And in 86, you're faced with the decision that many expat families do, who, as you say, who are transients with young children. Do you stay or do you go? What prompted your decision in the end in 1986 to leave Hong Kong?
It was a process. I referred earlier to our parents, that wanted to be the grandparents that we didn't have. So their son was 11 and it was bar mitzvah time and there was no Jewish school for them. So we said, if we stay here, it's not for a few years. We have to wait until the youngest will be 18, and that's too long. So we went to Israel in 1985 to find out if we could make Aliyah in 1985. But that was not a very good moment because there was inflation of 400% in Israel. And even my idea that I had a Dutch passport and the relationship with China would develop was not enticing for any of my former clients. They said, you can come to Israel, but you have to pay your own salary. We cannot afford it. So we came back, and then in December of 1985, we got a very remarkable phone call from the Netherlands. I have to go back. When we bought that house from the notary, actually that house we bought because we couldn't afford another house. And we saw a beautiful house, but it was above our budget. And then I made another promise to Vera. I said, you know what, let's go to Hong Kong, save some money. Maybe when we go back, we can afford that house. So every year for annual leave, every year, I didn't miss one single year. When we went back to Amsterdam, I went to the broker. I passed the house and I said, listen, Michael, I want to buy the house, keep me informed. So in December 1985, I get a telephone call. And he says, listen, you won't believe it, but probably the house is for sale. So I said, you know what, you make an appointment tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I will be in Amsterdam. So he made the appointment. We bought a ticket the same evening. I phoned my friend who was a banker. I said, listen, you have the whole night to arrange a mortgage loan for me. And tomorrow, when I land at Schiphol at 8 o'clock, I will call you whether it's approved or not. And so we arrived, we left and we went to the house. There was a non-Jewish family living, and we get into the house and there's a big picture of a rabbi in the house. So I tell Vera, listen, the rabbi is waiting for us. The loan was approved, we get into the house, and in 10 minutes the house was bought. And that was the sign that sort of closed the whole circle from the notary in Amsterdam to going in Hong Kong and having a decision to stay or not to stay. With that house being in our name, there was no question, it was the clearest road sign for us to make a decision to go back. And we did.
And having gone back, at the time, did it seem as though you had been through an incredible challenge in order to make the Jewish Recreation Club a kosher base here in Hong Kong?
No, I don't think, at that time we felt, we did something special. For us, it was very logical. It was a very logical approach. Only after 30 years, and frankly speaking, only after this trip, we realized where, our successors, and Robbie took over, took the Olympic torch and carry it over, in contrary to what I did in the bank. In the bank, they sold the unit this week by coincidence, and basically it was a road of destruction. And here, I'm to see all of you sitting here, you were all part of that previous life, and you worked in it, and going to the school, all the schools. We had a VIP tour on Friday and see the kids. It's a dream.
You lived in Holland from 1986 to 2010, and then in 2010 made Aliyah to Israel. I just want to ask a question, and maybe this is more for Vera than anything else, because although it's fantastic for us, how on earth did you schlep around so many things relating to your time here in Hong Kong? The Jewish Chronicle, all the minutes and everything else. How and why did you think about keeping so much of what's become essential Hong Kong Jewish history?
I think it's in Greek they call it Koach Elyon. You know, it's providence. Because not only that I kept it, you know, we had a flat in the house, in our cellar, where I kept all the papers. And most of the papers were destroyed, except for those papers. They were in a plastic box. There was no water damage. They are in mint condition like yesterday. And I haven't looked at the minutes for quite a long time. And it came only after Julie sent me the mail for the Fireside chat that I said, listen, I can't just go and sit there, you know, and think, you know, from memory, you know. So we have a copy of this in Israel. I took all the minutes and I sat down for 2 weeks, from the morning till the evening, and I wrote this, you know, and it came out, you know, with no pain. You know, it was like flowing, you know, I had to check dates, you know, or names, etc. But the story was pre-printed in my head, you know, it's, and I think it's, you know, it was meant to be.
It was meant to be. And Mark, there are stories we haven't had the opportunity yet to go into. We certainly look forward to reading that book. We're so pleased that you did manage to keep such a treasure of Jewish Hong Kong history. We're tremendously grateful to you for doing that. And thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. We've run a full hour. Mark, would you be prepared to take a couple of questions?
Any questions?
If there are any questions, just one or two, because we've certainly run on for a bit. Nina.
Just an odd question. The guy with the Magen David, you know, that was working in the kibbutz, what was his name, and do we know where he is?
I have no idea. Yeah. This whole episode, you know, came and it went. It was like, you know, I don't know.
He became Choser B'Tshuva and he went to Israel.
I don't know. It's you know, if you were there, I'm telling this story every Pesach. But when you talk about, you know, whether there's somebody, Bashamayim, you know, that guides. I've used that story every year on Pesach.
SJ.
When you arrived in Hong Kong as a banker, it was a time when it was most difficult to get a banking license. So, first question: Did you get a banking license to start a bank, or was it a deposit taking company?
It was a deposit taking company.
I see. So second, is the bank Pearson Ejlenberg, is it still there?
That's right. No, they sold it this week. They sold it this week to someone, and it became a total different animal. It became a total different animal.
Is it a consumer bank or what?
It was a private banking, you know, for high net worth individuals.
Sherry, did you raise your hand? Sorry. Oh, sorry, Philip.
Hi. Fascinating. Hopefully I can keep your legacy going, because I do something slightly smaller with another Jewish paper here. But I interviewed somebody who was also explaining how the Kosher facility was set up with the Jewish Recreation. A gentleman called David Baxbaum. You didn't mention it at all so far. Did you have anything to do with him? And
no, David Baxbaum didn't come up in this conversation, but he is in. There's a few people, you know, that you know, it's 1 hour and we can go on for a few hours, but. There's a few people here that need to be aware. One is David Baxbaum. Then there is Rina Tzion, you know, who was very active. And I would like to have a special mention here for this lovely couple, Hannah Tzion and Ephraim Tzion, who Rav Avton calls, you know, the unsung heroes. You know, they are an essential part of it. And Rav Avton and Goldie, you know, when they came here, you know, it's not the time frame, you know, in this interview, but you know, these players are an integral part of the people that I work with, you know, to make it happen behind the scene, and each had its own contribution in that development, and together, you know, it was absolute marvelous teamwork. So, but it's impossible. It's good that you mentioned David Baxbaum here, because even in this paper, that's why I call it draft, I want to be very careful that I at least don't forget to mention any names, because there are many names involved in those days. So if I didn't mention their names, it doesn't mean that they played a role. It's just
absolutely.
because the type of questions and the answers, you know,
Sure.
had to fit in a period of time.
And it'll all be in the book because David was actually on one of the committees, one of the key committees, and he was certainly involved in the evolution of the committee decision-making process.
There was the Darwish family. They was very involved with the kashrut. Even before, when they become Chozrei B'Tshuva, they become very orthodox.
He was a member of the religious committee, so all the names of the religious committee, you know, are in this document. And I have the minutes of the religious committee, so his name is there, his involvement is recognized. Don't worry about it. I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of it. But you know, all the committee members, you know, there were a lot of people. Naomi Paley, you know, was very
Yes.
active. You know, and there's Myron Mushkat, you know, Charlotte Godkin, there's you know, Madeleine Fenn. You know, I can go on. Huh?
Her son just came recently.
So I have it here. So the beauty is I have everything, you know, and it is minutes, it's facts. You know, I'm not quoting, you know, from things that are not, so this is very factual.
No, Mark, you lived here in a great time of Hong Kong history, and we're certainly all indebted to you. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark. Very, very good. Thank you very much.